I have prepared a brief legislative update highlighting some of the points as part of this legislative session, mainly dealing with the governor's budget proposal. The first talks about inflation funding. There's a proposed increase to our base support level of 1.59%. And this would bring in a $53.63 additional per weighted student count. This is a permanent increase to the base support level. This inflation increase for TUSD would bring in approximately $3.5 million. At this time, it's important to note, though, that we are still in declining enrollment and declining, as of the last 100-day report, we were down 839 students. So that would be a negative impact of $3.4 million that pretty much washes out the inflation increase. In addition to that, we have declining exceptional education students to the tune of $1.2 million in decline in that area. Again, these are based on a preliminary 100-day report, and the numbers would be subject to change once those are firmed up. And this is just a graph that shows the declining enrollment over time. Since 05-06, we were at 56,959 students. Now we're at 45,955 for the 100-day report. The next part of the governor's budget proposal is retroactive inflation increase. So there's a proposed $54.31 increase to the base support level that is considered an inflation adjustment down payment. I've also provided a graph here so that you can see the budget years over time, and you can see the 4 years highlighted in yellow were the years during the recession that there was no inflation increase during that time. That caused the inflation base support level to have a cumulative shortfall over time that peaked at $240.10. This proposal, 5431, as you can see shaded in blue at the bottom, would bring down that shortfall to 185.79. So we are still due some funds as part of the lawsuit that is currently underway. The governor's proposal statewide provides $74.4 million, of which TUSD would receive $3.2 million. Our total cumulative shortfall was estimated to be approximately $15 million. Okay. So that is good news, right? This is not a permanent increase, though, to the base support level, so that it's important to keep that in mind. The next part of the governor's budget proposal was the repeal of student success funding. So this fund lived, only for 1 year. It only existed in this fiscal year 14-15, and the funds are being used to reallocate them to our new Access Our Best Public Schools Fund, and it'll be a competitive fund that will be administered by the School Facilities Board. TUSD received $815,000 this fiscal year, and that was used for teachers' salary increases. The next piece is a 5% reduction to the District Additional Assistance Fund. The reduction is an additional $113 million in 15-16 on top of the current $238 million that's already been cut. So the total cut statewide is $350 million. The cut is approximately $135 per student. So for TUSD, this is equivalent to approximately a 90% reduction in capital funds. So just to put things into perspective, $22.5 million allocation would be cut approximately by almost $20 million, leaving us with slightly over $2.5 million. So you'll see what the reduction looks like for 15-16, $5.8 million on top of the 14, totaling the 19.8. By the end of 15-16, TUSD will have lost almost $100 million of the last 7 years, equivalent to a 60% reduction in the last 7 years. So back in 7 years ago, these funds, capital funds, were suffering these reductions. So cumulative shortfall for TUSD would be $100 million by the time next year is done. It's important to note that the District Additional Assistance Fund is used for capital items, not only for buildings and grounds improvements and construction, but also furniture, equipment, computer software, textbooks, library books, and supplemental instructional materials. items that are used directly by the students. Along with this 5% reduction in non-instructional cut requirement, along with the DEA requirement, there is a mandate now that we shift part of our funding over to the instructional side of the house. And with that, there were some changes in the proposed legislation to also include now instructional support and student support. So this is good news for our district, given the fact that most of our DSEC dollars are used in that area. So what this means for districts that are rated A or B, the governing board must hold a public meeting to discuss the plan for reductions to meet the new requirement of the cut. The $113 million that we spoke about in this slide is part of this reduction and shift. Okay? The governing board must include the percentage of classroom spending on its adopted budget. So for districts that are rated C, D, and F, they have an additional requirement that involves input from the public. So we have to hold a public hearing to allow community input on recommended areas for cuts. Again, the governor and the legislature, their intent is to have class spending increase in total percentage over this year's spending limits. So it'll be our effort to reduce the costs or make those cuts in the following categories: school and central administration, and then in the areas of plant operations, student safety, and transportation would be the only other areas that would be left to make these cuts from. Okay. At this point, I'm not suggesting that the cuts should be made from there, but these would be the areas that would be up for consideration. If you look at TUSD current budget, this is a maintenance and operation budget by category. The areas shaded in yellow would be the areas that would be protected, which would be instruction, student support, and staff support. And you'll see these are the percentages of the budget in that area. So in the other areas, you would have executive administration, school and central administration, operations, and transportation. Now, we have to also be mindful that in operations, for example, we have fixed costs that we cannot cut. You know, for example, utilities. So we have to look at measures to save, you know, energy and consumption, water consumption, and those type of strategies to be able to accommodate and have cuts that are realistic. And again, we did a graph here showing all the functions here by department. So all your departments are listed up on top and the total budget for the departments. And then on the bottom part, we have all the areas that comprise the school budgets and their total. So the projected reduction, if we were looking at a $6 million reduction, and I just rounded up because we feel that the number that was provided by the state may be a little low. These would be the actual cuts in these areas if we were spreading the cut evenly from each department or from each area based on their budget allocation. If we projected the reduction to only take place from the departments and not the schools, then these would be the cuts from within each one of these categories: administration, operations, and transportation, totaling your $6 million. But again, those are the plans that we have moving forward. We're meeting with the individual departments, asking them to look at any possible ways that they can reduce their budgets, especially those that focus on these central operations areas. The next part of the governor's budget proposal is the 1% constitutional cap. And this one tends to be a little bit complicated because, again, this talks about one of our favorite topics, taxes, right? So this would cap at $1 million per county the amount of additional state aid that each school district receives that would be exceeding the constitutional limit on property taxes. Currently, this only impacts 2 counties in the state of Arizona, that being Pima and Pinal counties. And the major contributor here would be Tucson Unified School District. So if this goes into effect, we would lose $8 million in funding with the current tax rate that we have in effect today. Any additional state aid over the $1 million would be paid by other jurisdictions levying a primary property tax that overlap with the school districts in question. So what this means is that this is not just a TUSD problem. The constitutional limit in tax rate is combined from all political jurisdictions within our county. So it's not just the district. The district is the one that receives relief from the state in the form of additional state aid. So it's important to, just keep that in consideration. It's not just TUSD's fault, it's, everybody's efforts combined that we have to move forward and try to find a solution so that we don't experience a cash shortfall to meet our budget. So how does this affect TUSD? This is a cash flow problem, not a budget problem. So I just wanted to reiterate that. The district's maintenance and operation and capital budget limits are set by formula and statute. So what can we do? So there's very limited control as what the district can do with its tax rate. Again, there are a lot of mathematical calculations that we don't, that we just perform based on numbers that are just given to us. And I'll give you some examples. Every March, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee determines our qualifying tax rate, and that's used using Arizona's overall net assessed value. This qualifying tax rate determines the amount of state equalization assistance that will be provided to the state, by the state to the district to fund our M&O and capital budgets. The other portion that's left is what we levy and is raised through the form of local property taxes. So we have no control over the qualifying tax rate. The total levy needed is divided into the district's assessed valuation. Again, that's another factor that we do not control. So again, it's pretty complex, but we are currently in discussions and trying to meet with county officials to try to prepare ourselves and see what we can do to work collaboratively to deal with this issue. And then other bills to watch, that we've looked at is Senate Bill 1371. That requires school districts who are under desegregation orders or agreements to phase out their local levies over 10 or 15 years, 10 or 5 years, respectively. And the cost impact is approximately $5.8 million beginning 16-17. Another bill to watch for is the per pupil transportation support level. This bill repeals our transportation revenue control limit and eliminates the current transportation formula. This would be replaced by an average of peer districts. As you know, TUSD does not have an average per se because we transport a lot of students with using our desegregation funds. So this would present tremendous problems for our district if this funding were to go away. Sorry, I think I went the wrong way here. Okay, changes beginning in fiscal year 2017. Again, we would go to current year funding as part of this governor's proposal. So all districts would go to the current year funding, and this would be a cut of $40 million to districts statewide. Currently, we're funded on prior year funding. So in a situation like TUSD with declining enrollment, if this were to go in effect today, we'd lose $5 million right away. So this would have a lot of impact on our district if this were to go all the way through and get approved. The JTID is another piece that I know that there's been a lot of talk about that. It changes the base support level for districts and charters in which a student is also enrolled in the JTID satellite program. So our funding would be reduced by 7.5% every time one of our students goes to a JTID satellite class. And the same way it impacts the JTID in itself. So they're also penalized by 7.5% for those students that are also enrolled in the district attending their schools. So again, it's a double whammy, if you will, that both sides would be penalized. Districts that experience a reduction can use a portion of their JTID monies to offset the loss of regular education funding. So this basically allows us to supplant, which we hadn't been allowed to do that in the past. And then the last stipulation here is that districts cannot prohibit or discourage students enrolled in the district from attending courses offered by a JTID. And I know that the TUSD is not willing to sacrifice its programs. I know that students and teachers alike may be concerned over the loss of these programs, but we remain committed to continue funding them as best we can within the constraints of our budget.